Okay, so here we are once again. I'm with one of my favorite people in the whole world, super rock star astrologer, Heather. What's going on, Heather?
Not much, just sitting here talking to you, and I'm really happy to be here again. I always like having these conversations.
People seem to dig us. It's like we always get really, really good comments for the most part on,
Yeah, I
on our
think it works
videos.
well.
Yeah, people say that I'm less of an asshole when I talk with you.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you have a good effect on me. It's a
well,
good
that's
thing.
good.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
Uh,
more of an asshole. Maybe that's a good thing.
I
Because
don't think so. I don't
people I
think.
think I'm really like nice and sweet, and then we do these conversations, and I get a little Scorpio rising on.
Well, that's why we get along and that's why we connect. So
Yeah, Virgo, Scorpio rising, and it's Virgo season, so this is our season.
this is our time. So let's shine, shall we?
Yeah, let's get into it.
We're
And
going
we
to be
have
talking about.
a new moon in Virgo.
I know, new moon in Virgo. Is everybody excited with the new moon in Virgo? They're probably, oh, no, not a new moon in Virgo.
Right?
But a new moon is a time to celebrate regardless of what sign it's in. And I actually think that the new moon in Virgo has some really great energy because the sun is supplementing the moon. And if the moon is what? The moon is the moon in its detriment in Virgo
It
or its
doesn't
fall?
like being in Virgo.
Doesn't like being in Virgo. So it's going to get a little added benefit from the sun at 17 degrees. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a few other aspects that are coming up as well. So let's get into this new moon in Virgo. And what are your feelings about it? What are your initial kind of thoughts?
I actually really like this new moon in Virgo. This is the first new moon that is ushering us out of eclipse season. It's the first new moon that's not an eclipse that we've had in like 2 months. And we're officially out of eclipse season with this new moon. So I like that because it's going to calm things down a little bit. And also the new moon, and I'll share my screen so we can kind of show everyone what it looks like for those who are, versed in astrology. The new moon here is actually in an opposition to Neptune, which can bring a little bit of confusion, fog, disillusionment. It can make people a little out of touch with reality, a little bit more idealistic, but it also brings compassion, right? And romance and creativity and spirituality and all these wonderful Neptunian things. And especially in this really nice sextile that the sun and moon are going to be in with Jupiter and Scorpio, right?
Mhm.
And so, I think this is going to be a really positive, very expansive, sort of idealistic energy, but also a really creative, intuitive energy that's going to be brought into that earth energy because, Virgo is very practical, logical, linear. It's about like A plus B equals C, and we're going to organize it this way, and I'm going to over rationalize everything and overthink everything. Whereas Jupiter and Scorpio is about going a little bit deeper. It's about, the psychic energy. It's about things that are a little bit beyond this realm. And so is Neptune, right? Especially in Pisces. And so we're incorporating this element of intuition and interconnectedness to this very sort of piecemeal, energy of Virgo, where it's like focusing on all the details and all the parts. This is actually going to help it not be so specific, I guess. I don't know how to really word that without making it sound like Virgos are, you know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, there are some, how do I say this? Some aspects in here that really give this new moon, some outs, some relief, right? So we've got the trine to Pluto as well that's taking place during
Yeah.
that time, and that trine to Pluto with the sun and the moon is very, very intense, and it's not a stretch to hang in there with somebody or something. Like, let's say your life condition is challenged, wherever you are, whatever you're going through on this new moon. This trine with Pluto gives you the opportunity to sort of deal with this Neptune opposition with the moon and the sun. Because, my feeling about Neptune oppositions are really fascinating to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're talking about are two distinct different types of energies. And so, what is the strategy? Is the strategy to integrate the energy so the opposition becomes, shorter, more abbreviated, more integrated? Or is the opposition there to show you sort of this disparity between these 2 points of view so that you can become aware of it and then hopefully begin to integrate it? So we get into a Neptune opposition to the sun, especially in the sign of Pisces and Virgo. The headline is what's real. Are our emotions real? Are our life conditions real? You know, when we get into that Neptune opposition, sometimes there can be a sense of wanting to give up and to surrender. Or like, I've had enough. You know, I'm through with this emotion. I'm through this sort of earth experience. You know, I want to go to the other side. I want to go to Neptune, where, you know, whatever that is, you know, whether it's heaven or, you know, 2 or 3 cocktails or, you know, mighty spliff or whatever, or you know, checking out. I mean, that's the nature of this opposition. So I feel like it's not, I don't know if there's going to be like a major test for people, but I think there's a bit of a test here with this Neptune moon, Neptune sun opposition. Now here comes that trine to Pluto, and that's staying power.
Yeah.
That's staying power. It's like you can stay in the game with that trine to Pluto. And even what you were referring to when you started to get into this, that sextile to Jupiter in Scorpio also has this potential of regeneration at the same time. So I think the key to this new moon is for people to sort of move through their fears that they're not enough, because that's what happens with Virgo, especially the moon in Virgo. It's so critical. You know, I'm not enough. The emotions aren't enough. You know, I haven't done enough with my life. And to get through that, to really get through that, because I feel like, you know, we've kind of been indoctrinated into sort of this temporary autonomous zone of nihilism to some extent. Like, where's the meaning? What's happening? You know, there's so much information that we're being flooded with 24/7 that I think it's really easy for people to get discouraged. Really, really easy. And this Neptune opposition to the sun and the moon brings that out. And I would say, you know, don't get stuck there. Hang in there. Hang in there, because there's the potential for you to be able to transform your experience. And I think, and maybe you can chime in on this, is that one of the things that new moons offer us is the opportunity to do something different and to do something new. Yeah. So if you wanted to do something new, and you wanted to capitalize on this nice, sweet sextile, this nice, sweet trine, what would be some of the things that you would encourage people to check out during this new moon phase?
Well, for this new moon in particular, kind of going back to what you were saying about the regenerative and restorative power of Jupiter, first off in Scorpio, which is deeply regenerative in this sextile, but also Pluto in trine with the sun and moon in the sign of Virgo, right? Virgo is health, nutrition, the body, you know, focusing on your daily health routines, your daily health habits. So it's perfecting the body. And with Pluto, when it's in a trine with the sun and moon especially, it's a deeply regenerative and deeply restorative aspect that can bring really profound healing, not just healing on the physical level, but healing from a deeper place that affects the physical, right? So the root cause of illness on a psychological, spiritual, or emotional level can be drawn up through this energy. And you can have some sort of revelation that causes you to have some sort of new beginning in terms of what you want to create for yourself, for your health, right? This is a great time to think about not just your physical health routines and your nutrition and all of those types of things that are very Virgoan, but what's going on behind the scenes? What is the self-talk that's preventing you from actually healing, right? That's Virgo, self-criticism, like you mentioned. So when you have, especially the moon in Virgo, that's a very self-critical, it's internalized criticism, right? Because the moon is so internalized, it's our subjective experience of reality. So going a little bit deeper, right? Am I telling myself over and over and over again that I'm tired, that I'm sick, that I'm not well, that I can't do it, right? Or that I'm just not good enough, or my body's not good enough. So like, what is preventing you on that psychological, emotional level from, you know, healing? If you are somebody who's looking to like heal, which a lot of people these days are sick with chronic illness, you know, and all sorts of different things. And so I think this could apply to a lot of people. And even if people are not sick, you know, overtly with some sort of diagnosable illness, a lot of people are fatigued, overstressed, overworked. And so this is a really great time to think about self-care, because Virgo, even though it's very demonstrative in terms of like it shows up in service, right? Virgo is about showing up in service and how we can show up in service of other people, which is totally a part of this with Neptune in opposition. Are you showing up in service, or are you martyring yourself? Are you taking care of yourself first, which is a Virgo thing, or are you going to that opposition, which is Neptune, which is, you know, self-sacrifice? And so looking at, you know, in a holistic way, all of the things that are sort of contributing to the situation that you're in, I think that that's part of this new moon energy.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, you touched on some really good points, and it's so easy to go to Pisces or to go to Neptune. I'll stay on the couch and, I'll bond with Netflix for the next 8 hours. I'll binge watch and whatever happens during that binge watching time versus actually getting up and doing something and, getting on your bicycle or going to the gym or going to the garden or going for a walk. And the thing about the new moon, let me just back it up a little bit. One of the things that most people know is it takes about 30 days to create new habits and to create, new patterns, new structure in your life. So if you were to start with something new on this new moon, whether it's an exercise program or dietary program or a combination of looking at your thoughts and your feelings in conjunction with doing something sort of tangible, physical along those lines, it'll take you 30 days to break through something that from a Neptunian perspective will have been holding you back. And by that time, even though it's not exactly 30 days, because we're starting here on the 9th of September, on the 23rd, we have the moon in Aries, right? That's the moon in Aries.
Oh,
right?
The full moon, that's the 24th. Yeah, the full moon in
24th.
Aries.
Okay,
which
so
is
24th.
conjunct Chiron, which has another healing sort of aspect to that.
Right. So let's play this out a little bit. Let's say you were to start something here in this new moon that would be proactive in terms of your body health, your body, mind health. By the time the full moon in Aries rolls around, think of the energy that'll be associated with that full moon. Mm-hmm. Think of how you'll be able to look at the next 3 months, because here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're starting to deal with, the decline of the light and the days getting darker. And so having some energy during what appears to be, by the way, through the Farmer's Almanac, will be probably a very cold and wet winter. You kind of want to get some momentum going into the next 3 months. Yeah. So I think this new moon here in Virgo offers the opportunity to get involved in about a 3-week level or 3-week stage of, I want to use the word habituation, but being able to integrate these new habits and new patterns so that they're a part of your life. And I think this is a great opportunity to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And to harness that power of the equinox at the same time, like you mentioned, we're getting into the fall, and I love talking about the equinoxes and solstices and things like that. I'm very pagan in that way. I always do a little like ritual or something to like recognize, the decline of the sun and what's going on with the alignments with the equinox. And astrology, especially Western astrology, is based off of those equinoxes and solstices.
Yep.
And so harnessing the fall equinox, which is when the sun moves into Libra and will be opposing Chiron, and it's just 2 days prior to the full moon in Aries, I think that this is a really powerful time for, first off, letting go of bad habits too. That's part of it, right? Yep. That's Neptune and that's Pluto and, all of this energy. And Jupiter is looking to the future. It's like the broader perspective and the bigger picture. Whereas Virgo is so detail oriented and focused on, like the trees or whatever. You have Jupiter that's focused more on the forest, the bigger picture, like what's going on, what is this all creating and adding up to in your life. And so it can give you a sense of perspective. Like if I'm doing these little things every single day to create these better habits, this is what I can do for myself overall. This is what it's going to lead to. Mm-hmm. And I love the energy of harnessing the equinox. And so it's also a time of letting go, right? It's a time of thinking back to what we've done throughout this entire year and what we've built for ourselves this entire year and what has worked really well for us and what we maybe need to like let go of and clear away to make room and make space for, the solstice in the wintertime and the new year and, the new rebirth that's going to be coming with the sun at the end of this year. And so it's a time of reflection too. It's reflecting back. What did I create in terms of my habits? Where was I escaping from reality, right? Neptune versus Virgo. What was I avoiding and not dealing with directly? And maybe how can I change that moving forward? I think that's part of it too. And coming back into balance with the sun in Libra too, in relationship and just in general in all areas of life.
One of the things I think that we all go through this in our own way, but I think one of the most difficult parts of addiction is when people know they're addicted, to whatever, whether it's, a substance or a habit or a lifestyle. It's generally, my estimation, connected to some kind of substance, some sort of, physical manifest. Yeah. And they know they're addicted. And I think the most difficult part is knowing or understanding that they're going to have to climb out of hell for this addiction. And they just look at what's ahead of them. and they basically say, I can't make it, or I can't do it. And they know that in order to get right, they're going to have to, retrofit their entire life. And all the steps that go along with that, which means, admitting to the fact that, that they've, given into some part of their own experience that's really weak and vulnerable, pathetic, however they want to frame that. And then the challenge that for that person to admit that and how it's affected other people in their lives, right? Now, they have to come to those kinds of realizations. Then they have to come to the realizations that they're going to have to get through whatever it is that they're wanting to give up and need to give up. And that takes time and perseverance. Then they have to go through a sense that they could fail and they could let people down all over again. I mean, just that moment in time where people begin to, and I do believe that people who go through addiction, either once or twice or how many other times, they're aware of this process. And they're aware even before the fact of what it's going to take, even though they may not be able to break it down in its particular pieces. The one thing I really like about this new moon in terms of that process is that sextile to Jupiter, which means that you can go very deeply and you can transform things very quickly, maybe without having to completely go through every single step that I just sort of laid out there, right? But in order to do this now, there has to be kind of a spiritual pivot in the person's life. And this is where Neptune comes into play. This is where the better part of Neptune, the higher octave of Neptune, comes into play. Because when we think of Neptune, at least what I think of Neptune, I think of like the gutter and the stars. That's the breadth of it. So in order to get through whatever you're going to go through or whatever kind of piece you want to accentuate, well, guess what? You're going to have to engage a little bit of faith here. And there is a higher power. There is a greater will. There is a love divine that shines in each of our lives. And this is the force that resurrects people through the deepest and darkest periods of their life. And that's the higher octave of Neptune. And what is Neptune doing? It's in trine with Jupiter, right? So we have this really nice kind of combination that you can go through this, but you don't have to go through it alone. And I'm not talking about, your pals down at AA or the 12-step. The alone part is the existential part where we feel like we're abandoned, alone, bereft, washed ashore, that whole Neptunian, the darker Neptunian phase. It's like Neptune can rise up, but you have to develop a relationship. You have to develop a dialogue with that energy in your life. And I think that this is a really great opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting that we're bringing up the topic of addiction, which is something that I wasn't even thinking about at the beginning when we were like looking at the chart for this new moon, because Matt and I, my husband, for those who don't know, we're just talking about addiction yesterday and sort of the spiritual aspects of addiction in terms of, not everybody has this mindset. Maybe you, Robert, do or don't, I don't know. But in my experience and what I sense from people that I work with who have addictions and my friends who have addictions is that there's an entity attachment going on here, like a spiritual sort of otherworldly sort of entity attachment with some sort of demonic force or some sort of like entities that are helping to drive and perpetuate this addiction. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. This isn't like my own theory, right? A lot of different shamanic traditions and things like that, they believe similar things. And so with this Pluto in this really nice trine here with the sun and moon, it's almost like an exorcism, right? It's like exorcising your demons and doing so in a way that's not going to be super traumatic. When you have a trine, it's not like a big overt crisis. It's like it happens and it's intense, but it happens quite easily. It just sort of is, right? It's not like a thing that you're really forcing to happen. And so I really feel like, this would be a time if somebody is dealing with addiction, especially if they have sun, moon, rising, any of their personal planets at the, 15 to 17 degree, 18 degree in any of the earth or the water signs, because you're going to have these really positive impacts from these transits.
Right.
That could be a time for people to, and it's not just addiction to like drugs, right? People are addicted to sugar. Most people are addicted to sugar. caffeine, food, Netflix.
Absolutely.
Some people are addicted to spirituality and escapism through spirituality, which is a total Neptune and Pisces thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so, there are different layers and different types of addictions and habits and routines, and the moon also rules habits, right? It's things that are habitual. So it's very interesting that we're bringing up this point, because I just had this huge conversation about this yesterday.
Yeah. What's also fascinating too is that when we get into Capricorn, we're talking about like parental energy. Mm. And we're talking about sort of this sort of paternal energy. But I think it's benign paternal. It's not like the scolding father or the scolding boss. It is the paternal energy that wants to, how do I say this? Like make you a junior partner or something like that. It's energy that doesn't. It's not necessarily hierarchical, but at the same time, we have to in our own lives, in our own way, make decisions from a hierarchical position inside of ourselves. We have to. That's just the nature of it. We choose something for ourselves, and theoretically, we're at the top of that sort of pyramid of choice, right? But I think that this is a really, really good energy, so that we can begin to move in a direction where I believe the will becomes more congruent. Like the overall will becomes more congruent, and so that we can live in, greater alignment. And I think really that's what people are looking for. We want to live in alignment. We want our lives to work. We want to be able to flow more easily. And I think that this new moon has the potential for that. Do you want to talk about this T-square with Mars and Venus and Uranus? That's a whole other little side note story.
Yeah, especially with Mars and Uranus coming into. So Mars and Uranus, for those who aren't aware or haven't seen some of the previous videos, Mars has been going back and forth in this little dance and square with Uranus during the before and after of Mars retrograde. So the day after Mars officially moved into the sign of Taurus, it squared Uranus exact. And that was on May 15th. And that was the day that the U.S. Embassy was actually moved to Israel. And so there was a lot of bloodshed and a lot of sort of chaos that was created out of that. In retrograde on August 1st, there was another pass of Mars square Uranus. And now we're having the final pass exact actually on the 18th of September, so during this lunar month. And so this is sort of the resolution point and the final pass. Like this is where everything is solidified and finalized, and it's the final chance to make changes in our lives. But on a global scale, there are changes that have been going on as well. So I think this is probably more your area of of expertise. So if you want to talk a little bit about what's going on there.
Well, I think that, can we get out of share screen for a moment?
Yeah.
Because there are a few things I want to look up. That way it'll be, let me see if I can do this. I'm not sure if I can now. Hold on, let me do this. All right. So what I wanted to do is I actually wanted to look up Israel's chart, because one of the things you were talking about was these influences as they have related to what's been happening in Israel, which has not been insignificant, by the way. These are planetary changing events that are associated in many ways with prophecies, whether you believe them or not, whether you think they're synthetic or not. Enough people do, and put a lot of energy into them. So let me just find the chart here, and I'll, because this I think is kind of significant.
While you're looking for the chart too, and before we kind of get into that, you wanted to talk about with the new moon on September 9th, how certain things in really interesting events throughout history have been occurring on September 9th. And there's some very strange connections with some of the things that happened and were started in the United States, as well as in other countries. Like you said, the birth date of Washington, D.C. was actually on September 9th, as well as the birth date of California.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So let's get into some of these September 9th dates, which I think are pretty interesting. And
okay.
We'll flip back to the Israel chart.
Okay.
So first of all, September 9th tends to be a really bloody period in history Can you believe it? I mean, if you go back in the annals of history, basically from, like around 50 AD, maybe even before that, up through like the 1800s. I mean, we're talking just your battle and skirmish and infighting and dynasties rising and falling year after year after year. I mean, history is littered with the blood stain of these events. So that aside, I mean, there's a lot of it, by the way, on September 9th. But one of the interesting pieces as kind of a manifestation of a battle or a conflict is that in 1791, Washington, D.C. became Washington, D.C. So this is going to be the solar return of Washington and the birth date of the corporation known as the District of Columbia. Another very interesting day, which we didn't talk about, but I thought this was fascinating because of the numerology involved. In 1543, Mary Stuart, who was known as Mary, Queen of Scots, she was crowned as the Queen of Scots at 9 months old. So on 9/9, at the age of 9 months, she was crowned as Queen of the Scots. Fascinating stuff, right?
Yeah.
Along the lines of inauguration, California was inaugurated into the United States as the 31st state in 1850 on 9/9. That was just 1 year after the gold rush, the great gold rush of 1849, by the way. And then
it happened during Uranus and Taurus too.
That's right, absolutely. And then in 1948, Kim Il-sung declares the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So North Korea became North Korea in 1948 on 9/9. So we have these really interesting characters, these really interesting players in the sort of the geopolitical theater. We have Washington, D.C. becoming Washington, D.C., California becoming California, North Korea becoming North Korea. And then in 1956, probably one of the most important events in modern history took place. And that's when Elvis Presley appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show for the first time. And that is, in a lot of ways, the birth of rock and roll. It's on 9/9, 1956. They had to shoot Elvis from the waist up because his hips were too scandalous. Right? There's too much going on below the navel.
Yeah.
So that's the birth of rock and roll, 1956, Elvis Presley. And you and I were kind of joking about this one event, which happened not too long after that. Actually, it was a little bit before that, actually. So 1947. And this is the first case of the computer bug.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, yeah, computer. There's a lot of bugs in computers. Right? So this first case of the computer bug was actually a moth that got caught in one of the relays of a Harvard Mark II computer at Harvard University and shut the computer down. So you and I were joking about maybe this is where we got the name and the idea, like there's a bug in the computer, there's a bug in the program, because there was really an actual bug. the first bug. So these are some of the more interesting events. Now, in 1993, Israel and Palestine were having talks. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of an important day because that's when the PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, actually recognized Israel as a legitimate state. And if you go back and look at what was taking place basically between 1948 and 1993, it's changed a lot since then. Between that time, there was a lot of aggression that was taking place in that part of the world because obviously there were a number of people who believed that that land was taken illegitimately. And there were people that were displaced, and we saw the birth of Zionism as a result of that. So 1993, in a big move, the PLO recognizes Israel. So let me see if I can find that chart here. Just go this, here we go. So on May 14th, 1948 is when Israel became a nation state, even though it was formally recognized by Palestine.
Oh, that's interesting.
1993. So let's go into their Okay. So one of the things that's, so Israel happens to be a Libra rising state, which I think is interesting, kind of funny actually. And it's a Taurus country, and the sun is in the 8th house, which is buried. You know, it's a house of secrets and the underworld, kind of a fascinating place for the sun.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of Leo energy in this chart. The moon is at 4 degrees. We have Mars at 28 degrees, and also Saturn, which is also in Leo, and that's at 16 degrees, and Pluto in Leo as well, and that's at 12. So we have the moon, Pluto, Saturn, and Mars. Well, transiting Mars, and this is where we're going with all this, transiting Mars in Aquarius, as it's going to move forward, is going to start to oppose all of these planets, and they're fixed planets in the Israeli chart. So I would assume that that's going to be violence, that that's going to be some kind of upheaval as Mars goes through the bottom part of Israel's chart. It's going to be going through the 4th house.
Yeah.
And Israel also has kind of this sort of split identity, of course, between Israel and Gaza and Palestine. Mercury's at 10 degrees in Gemini, and they also have Uranus
The 8th
in
house, yeah.
Gemini as well, right? Uranus is at 24 degrees. So I would assume that as we get to move forward, and pretty quickly, by the way, once Mars gets into about 0, 1, 2, 3, that opposition with the moon in the Israeli chart, also transiting South Node will be on the Israeli moon. This is going to be a very interesting time. So I think part of what we've been talking about here in terms of the eclipse cycle and post-eclipse cycle, all the major changes from declaring that Jerusalem was going to be the new capital of Israel, to that law that we talked about that was right after the Star of David on the first eclipse, where Israel basically said, we're going to be a nationalist state, and equal rights and civil rights don't really matter to us. And that was really kind of under the radar, although there were some people who were buzzing about it. They basically said, screw you, screw the rest of the world. We're going to determine who we are and how we treat people. Doesn't matter, regardless of public opinion, regardless of boycotts, screw you, right? So that was another piece. So here we go. Mars is coming in. It's going to start to oppose these very intense planets, and all in Leo and fixed sign. Mm-hmm. So what we're dealing with here is ultimately this Sun-Mars square and Mars-Mars opposition, which will come at the end of this very prolonged Mars transit.
Yeah.
It's going to be very, very interesting and very intense time for that part of the world and that region. And we're going to see how all this plays out and all of its various manifestations. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Trump just cut a bunch of aid to Palestine. Didn't have a lot to begin with. It's just, the treatment of the Palestinians has been aberrant since Trump has gotten into. I mean, it's never been great, but it's never been worse than with Trump in the White House, because obviously he's taking orders from his buddy Bibi, his buddy, and so that bears watching. That's of course one of these hotspots, geopolitical, but also there are people that believe that there's a portal there over that part of the world, and the reason why it is always in some form of conflict and stress is to keep that portal wide open.
Interesting.
And to allow these energies, some of which are not in our best interest, they're not benevolent, they're malevolent, to come through. So let's keep an eye on what's going to happen in the Middle East, specifically with Israel and the surrounding regions.
Okay. So can I share my screen real quick? Because I pulled up the chart and I just want to show everyone, because this is super interesting, just to demonstrate what you were saying. So Israel has its moon, what, at 4 degrees in the sign of Leo. And so when Mars is coming into this square with Uranus, it's in opposition to the moon. So it's forming a T-square with the moon, right?
That's
Which is
right.
the 7th house. The 7th house has to do with like agreements, contracts, things like that. The 10th house is public reputation. Obviously, the moon has an association with the home and like a lot of different things. But so you have the Mars, which is in the 4th house, which also is the home, family, property. I would say that it would have to do with like boundaries and things like that, you know, in terms of if you're looking at the chart of a country. And so this is forming a T-square. And so that T-square, this is the reason why the activity with this Mars-Uranus square on a global scale has been centered a lot around Israel. And what's going on there. And so, yeah, so it's going to be passing for the final time on the 18th. So on or around that day, that's going to be a significant time period. And it's also been activated by the eclipses. You have the North Node right now, right on top of the moon for, for Israel. And so, I mean, it kind of makes sense that they're kind of moving forward and pushing their agenda a little bit more so, because the North Node would make them sort of obsessed with that, right? It's about obsession. It's about moving forward into something new. And usually when you have the North Node activating one of your personal planets like that, you can tend to overdo it, but you usually succeed, right? Because it's like this really intense energy. It's like fated energy. Like you're meant to go into this path for whatever reason, for better or for worse, right? Because sometimes the North Node is kind of overdoing things a little bit, especially in the sign of Leo. I feel like in the sign of Leo, it's a little overly ambitious or a little bit, it's like an egotistical, like self-centered sort of energy, thinking about yourself versus other people. And, you know, it kind of makes sense, right? They're thinking about their needs, their desires in terms of like what they want as a country and not worrying so much about what this is doing to the Palestinians, who they obviously don't care so much about. So anyway, it's interesting the way that this shows up in the chart.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's an area to really, you know, keep an eye on. And, you know, this country has some really challenging astrological aspects ahead of it. Specifically when Saturn goes into Aquarius and goes through their 4th house and begins to oppose. Like, I think public opinion at that time, so we're talking, what, about 2.5 years from now? Almost 3 years. I think public opinion is really going to impact, you know, because we're talking about the public opinion, we're talking about Aquarius and the world and collectivity, and we're getting into that language of the opposition. Now, not quite at the same time, but kind of as a precursor, Uranus is going to hit the Israeli true node in Taurus. And that's going to be, let's see, it's at, the true node is at what? It's at 10, 11, 12. So 12, 13 Taurus.
Yeah.
So we're talking halfway through the transit. So that's going to be about 3.5 to 4 years from now, which will be kind of right at the end of the Saturn transit through Aquarius, which will be opposing their Mars. So we're looking at a Saturn-Mars opposition and Uranus on their true node. I would be very surprised, to be honest with you, if Israel as we know it makes it through that time. That'll be a major test for Israel and for that part of the world and for the world in general, because I think the energy is going to be extremely explosive. And because think of it now, Saturn will have gone through the opposition to the moon, to Pluto, to Saturn. That's a lot of stress. That's a lot of tension. And then it comes in with that opposition to Mars, and we have the Uranus conjunction with the true node, and not far after that, you're going to be Uranus-Sun conjunction with Israel, right? So there's going to be change in this place. There's going to be major change, and what kind of change remains to be seen. But we might get a glimpse of it here with Uranus going through the 4th house, and over the course of you know, from now until what, November, roughly, in November. Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Very interesting.
Yep.
So let's kind of shift gears, because we have a couple other things coming up this this month that are going to be pretty significant as well. We have Pluto stationing direct, which happens every year, obviously. And then we have Venus just a couple days later, or about a week later, which is going to station to go retrograde. And this is something that happens only once, roughly every 2 years.
That's right.
And it's retrograding in the sign of Scorpio, but it's actually already today, on this day as we're recording this, we're putting it later, it's going into its pre-shadow at 23.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And so it's going to be retrograding beginning October 5th. It'll be all the way through to November 16th. And then we have the post shadow that goes all the way through until almost the holidays, so December 17th. And so Venus will be going back and forth in the sign of Scorpio. And it goes into this pre-shadow period in a really beautiful sextile with Mercury, actually, in Virgo. Or not in Virgo, what's before Virgo? My brain.
Leo.
Leo, yeah. So it's in a really nice sextile with Leo. Mercury's about to go into Virgo later this week. But yeah, so it's kind of like a nice, I feel like that's a good omen for the Venus retrograde. Venus retrogrades in general aren't necessarily overtly detrimental, but bring some stuff, some heavy stuff around relationship, especially, you know, in the sign of Scorpio. So I'm interested to hear your take on this.
So Jasper's been channeling what he thinks.
Yeah, I can see that.
Talking about with Venus retrograde. So I actually got into this on my live stream last night a little bit. If you look at the pattern, we start off Venus at Libra, which is kind of this, you know, holistic model of relationship, right? Venus is in its own sign with Libra, and things are hunky-dory, peachy keen. Then it goes into Scorpio, and there is this retrograde pattern of going back into the roots of relating, the fear of maybe commitment, maybe the fear of loss, the fear of abandonment. And to me, it offers up a benign opportunity for us to deal with some of our fixed attitudes and beliefs around intimacy and what we're capable of and what we're worthy of in our lives. And it feels to me like on this level, it won't be too harsh, because ultimately we come back to Venus and Libra. We come back to this kind of holistic state, holistic nature of relating. And so we start off, we end up at the place we started off at, which was this place of wholeness. And we return to wholeness as well, but from a new perspective, from a new sort of going through this cycle where maybe we can remove a few things that keep that wholeness from becoming a more stable and permanent part of our lives. You know, I mean, I think that that's part of it. And I think it'll actually be really good for people. But I also got the sense too, I was looking at this, I feel like that on a collective level, we're going to go through some kind of crisis. And when I say crisis, I'm talking about something that's connected to either the environment or some kind of event. Like right now, there's a bunch of flooding happening and starting to take place in the Midwest because you're getting a ton of rain, right? That may not happen or manifest immediately, but I was looking at the energy and some of the, like I was looking at the Sabian symbol for that Venus retrograde, and the Sabian symbol has to do with like being able to, it's about rescuing a person from a burning building, right? That's where that Sabian symbol is for here. That's where it is. And so I was looking at that. I was looking at some of the Mars square energy, and it felt like we're going to witness some kind of collective crisis, but it's a crisis where there is something heroic that emerges. It's not just like another crisis where, you know, it's all screwed up and there's not a sense of like we have all these shootings, and some of which may be real, some of which may not be real, a combination of the two, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But what we never really have with any of those things is some kind of closure. There's never any closure. You know, either the person who does the shooting is dead, or, you know, or their brains are scrambled and, you know, they're hauled off. What I'm talking about is a crisis where people emerge, and they emerge as being heroic. They emerge as, you know, sacrificing their own safety and their own well-being for the greater good or for whatever happens. And I feel like we're going to come up on an event like this during this Venus retrograde, because we're talking about relationship and risking one's life or self for the life of self of another, which is Scorpio, right? It's extreme. It's powerful. It's profound. So I think on a collective level, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at maybe it's an earthquake, maybe something along these lines, where all of a sudden we get these stories of people who are doing things that are heroic or larger than life. I think that's going to be part of this Venus retrograde. That's my hit.
That's interesting. Yeah. And you were saying about like flooding and stuff like that. If there is an event like that, it could involve water, obviously, because Scorpio is like intense, extreme water. So it could
That's
be
right.
like flooding and flash flooding and, like downpours of, storms and things like that. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So on an individual level though, uh, what do you think we can do with this energy? Because this is a lot about, revisiting the past when it comes to our relationships and connection with people. And when it's Scorpio, I feel like Venus retrograding in the sign of Scorpio holds on to things that are very psychologically and emotionally sort of significant. It doesn't hold on to material things. It holds on to things that have an emotional value or something like that, right? And it holds on a little bit too tightly sometimes. But then when it lets go, it lets go. And it's like, it's done. It's black and white. It's very extreme. That's what you taught me, right?
Yeah.
And so it feels like for a lot of people, it's going to be a process of digging up old baggage and like releasing a lot of these ties to past relationships and past sort of experiences in relationships that are maybe preventing people from moving on or that are detrimental in some sort of way. So it's going to be drudging up some stuff, I think, for people. And like you said, it's going to be at the end, we're going back into Libra, right? We're going back into balance. We're going back into harmony. So that place of like, being back in balance. But I think in order to do that, we have to go down to the depths and we have to re-experience some stuff, maybe even that wasn't so nice to experience the first time around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Venus and Scorpio is really into power plays. If you really study Venus and Scorpio and you study to some degree people who have Venus and Scorpio, there's a part of that individual, whether they're conscious of it or not, that are into power. It's either power in a relationship, being the person that controls and dominates the flow of the relationship, because that's the nature of Scorpio. And, for whatever fear, the fear of losing a person or the fear of not being in control or whatever those things are. And that's kind of a benign version. There are other versions of Venus and Scorpio where people are power driven and they seek out situations where, they want to have more power. Like I think sometimes Venus and Scorpio in the workplace, like the Venus and Scorpio in the 10th house, that could be really problematic because you're dealing with power issues inside of your career, whether they're yours or other people. There's kind of a conspiratorial sort of tone with Venus and Scorpio. So I think the whole idea with Venus and Scorpio, we talked about this last night, any planet in Scorpio, the whole idea is to transform the nature of that thing, to transform the nature of relationship, to transform the nature of intimacy. And, and you're right on the money, which is to let go, right? To let go of the reins a little bit with Venus and Scorpio. And when that happens, you get to find out, you get to probably get to have anything you want. And that's the paradox, that you don't need to be involved with somebody super powerful, where you don't need to lord the power or dominate the relationship. And if you let go, you'd be really blown away by what happens and what takes place. And I think what's going to occur for a lot of us during this time is, what are we holding on to that keeps us from either greater intimacy, greater trust, whatever those things are. I think this is a time where we can let them go. And for a lot of people, the reason why they hold on to so much stuff is because a lot of people are really hurt, mm-hmm. right? They're hurt. It's not just some kind of malevolent marker inside somebody's chart. There's generally been pain, suffering. Somebody had, maybe if you have Venus and Scorpio, somebody close to you died that you were very close to, right? Like, could it be a parent? Could be maybe your first boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever. There's pain there, right? So in order to cover up that pain, you get into control. Well, this is a time where we can unhook some of that with that retrograde piece. And it's like, okay, do we always have to be in control? We always have to make sure that, we're covering our hearts and we're not going to get hurt. And I think that that's what it's about. And again, because it comes back into Libra, it comes back into this balance place. Also, Scorpio represents, and Venus has a lot to do with resources and wealth. It's not just relationship. So maybe we can all look at also how we view our relationship with resources and money and what money represents. Money is just energy. That's the Scorpio like definition of money. Like this, right? Like the, you know, this thing that I'm holding right here, this middle metal coin, well, that's Taurus. But there's like a thought form behind this. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. So Scorpio represents that thought form. So we get to, you know, again, look at our relationship to resources as they relate to money and hard assets. And we can probably, you know, move some of that energy as well. And again, Venus and Libra come back into balance. And what'll be really interesting, right, is when Venus goes direct and it goes back into Scorpio again. And when it goes back into Scorpio, we have a new template that's there that we can occupy and begin to work with. So this is a really interesting phase, especially coming off of all this male energy with Mars.
Yeah.
You know, and everybody just like, you know, banging their face. Right. So before everything went black, we were, you and I,
before you pounded your computer.
I was pounding my fist. So one of the things that this Mars transit, I think, really instilled in people, in not really in a healthy way, was like a list of demands. And, you know, this is what's really important to me, my group, my people, whatever. And I was thinking about this, like, you know, one of the things that you hear as kind of a refrain is, you know, I'm in charge of my game. I'm in charge of my game. You know, I control my game. I run my game. And that's a very kind of Mars-oriented statement. And I've been, you know, hearing more and more of that lately. When we get into like the Venus and Venus retrograde, it's not about control. It's not about control. And there is an aspect of our game that has nothing to do with us. And it has to do with something that's way beyond us, way beyond who we are, what we think we're capable of. And this Venus retrograde, I think, can bring us in touch, because we're dealing with a very different energy. It's feminine energy. It is not masculine energy. Mm-hmm. Mars was masculine energy, and this is Venus. It's feminine. Scorpio, it's retrograde, and it feels to me like there is a greater strength in being able to let go gracefully, than hang on and pound your fist and sort of demand that this is how things are, this is how things are going to be. This is not going to work during this retrograde. And people who understand that and get that will be rewarded by it. They'll be rewarded. And you move on and you get to experience maybe some brief grief or whatever, but the profundity of resurrection or transformation will far outweigh any kind of futile attempt to control situations.
Absolutely. No, I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense, especially in the sense, like, we can't control what other people are doing, right? We can only control what we do. And so when you have when you have Venus in Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto, there is this aspect of wanting to control the other person, which we talked about, you know, before everything went black and all of that. And so, yeah, it is about letting go of power, letting go of control, and realizing that what you want is not what everybody else wants, right? You can't force anybody to do anything. And so letting go of that aspect of control, I really like that as sort of part of this Venus retrograde process. I think that's really important, because a lot of people are trying to force other people to have the same mindset, the same beliefs that they have, you know, to do things their way. And I've been seeing more and more of that, I think, during the Mars retrograde period, especially. And you're right, the list of demands, that's that's definitely been a theme. I didn't even like realize until you just said that. So yeah, absolutely, that's perfect. So do you have any like final thoughts about what's going on this month?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in this phase, sort of socially and collectively, where, one more thing about this Venus retrograde that's going to be important on kind of a national or collective level, is this guy Kavanaugh is going to be sort of brought forward to be the next Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh. And there's going to be a lot of going over of his records. And apparently there were like thousands of his records that were kind of either deleted or erased on Friday night.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic as the left and the right get in line to either promote or, delete or erase Brett Kavanaugh through this Venus retrograde period. That'll be interesting. But, we're getting to this place now where we're getting very close to the midterms.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels to me like September is a bit of a calm before the storm.
Mm-hmm.
And when we kick into October and the early part of November, but especially October, I feel like things are really going to heat up. And that there's going to be more divisive rhetoric
Mm-hmm.
and more intensity as we head into those midterms. When do the nodes change?
The nodes change in November, and so does Jupiter, which is moving into Sagittarius, which we need to talk about just very briefly too,
Right.
because we're doing a webinar together on Jupiter and Sagittarius on October 20th. So I'm going to put the link for that in the description below.
Okay.
But so that's going to be a big thing that's happening. We'll talk about that a lot more next time around because it'll be in the next lunar cycle.
Right.
But yeah, so Jupiter is going to be moving into Sagittarius, which the rising sign for the United States is Sagittarius. So there's going to be a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about like sort of the macro level and then go all the way down to the micro level and talk about all the different aspects to different, personal planets and what you can expect on a personal level and how you can utilize the benefic energy of Jupiter in the sign of Sagittarius, which is its home sign. And Robert, you have Jupiter and Sagittarius in your birth chart. So you're
That's right, I do. And it's in my first house.
Yeah.
So if you sign up for the webinar with Heather and I, you're going to the right place.
Yeah.
You're getting straight Jupiter and Sag uncut.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, before we sign off, I wanted to just point out that by the time the midterms roll around,
Yeah.
the true node will be at 0 Leo. So it's going to be at its most potent expression.
Mm-hmm.
So we're dealing with like intense potential for, hubris and pride and arrogance and in that very full sort of, maybe not always, healthy Leo kind of way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that South Node is going to be in Aquarius, and Black Moon Lilith is going to be conjunct the South Node. It's going to be about a 9-degree orb, roughly, but still there's going to be this conjunction. And it just feels to me like this time running up into the election, there's going to be revelations
Mm-hmm.
with that South Node in Aquarius. And yeah, buckle your seatbelts, because right after that election, right after the midterms, the nodes shift.
Yep.
And so we've got the North Node going into
Cancer.
Cancer. That's actually going to be taking place it's like a day after, isn't it?
It's around the day of the midterms. Yeah.
Yeah. So the midterms are at 0 Leo. I think the day after
Mm-hmm.
is the 7th, and the node goes into 29 Cancer at that point in time. That's really interesting.
It
That's
is.
a fascinating shift. And then the South Node goes into Capricorn, which means that we're going to have, what do you make of this? I wanted to ask you about this. What do you make of this collision? And maybe we can talk about this more sort of in depth next time we get together. We'll just touch on it now. What do you make of this massive collision that we're going to have in Capricorn? I know it's a lot to talk about. You got Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn, and the South Node in Capricorn. All coming together.
So they're going to be coming together. So next year, actually, in 2019, we're having a series of eclipses, especially in July, where we're going to have eclipses conjunct in opposition to Saturn, right? And Saturn's going to be in a conjunction with Pluto. And so this is going to be, I really feel like, a vying for power and control, where the reins are going to get tighter and walls are going to be closing in on us. I think that this is an energy of overstepping, of sort of the government, right, where it's getting more and more and more intense. But I also think with Pluto there, I think we're going to reach a breaking point probably as we come into 2020, and everything is going to change, because that's when we have that exact conjunction happening in January 2020. And I think it's going to be like, it's going to reach this point where people cannot ignore it anymore. People cannot stand it anymore. And I think there is going to be some sort of revolt or some sort of major event that I think it will be actually like the fall of Rome or something, or the fall of an empire. That's what it feels like to me, because right now we're in a very Capricornian, and ever since Pluto moved into the sign of Capricorn, I mean, before that it was already starting and it was already a thing. But as soon as Pluto moved into Capricorn, it was like undeniable that we are in like we're not in a democracy. We're in like a corporatocracy or something.
Absolutely.
Like the corporations are running our government, and nobody can deny that at this point. And so I think that is another thing that is going to, again, reach a breaking point. The corporations and the government are like one entity now. They're closing in. And I think the South Node brings out the shadow of all these things, right? The South Node in Aquarius brought out the shadow and all of the sort of the things around, especially like liberals and the progressives and all of that. But these collective mindsets that are very dogmatic, right, became more dogmatic and more in your face, and more people were like rejecting them, because it's like, what is this, right? This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I thought it was. It's going to be the same thing, I think, with the South Node moving into Capricorn. People are going to realize, wow, this is not what I thought it was. This is not who I thought I was voting for. I thought I was voting for a person who was here to help me, not a corporation who's backing this person.
Right. Yep. It feels like the potential for flat out rejection. Of authority with that South Node in Capricorn. It'd be a very interesting time. Anyway, it all starts really the day after the midterms.
Which is interesting.
It totally is. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think it'll be to the benefit of the United States, because we have Jupiter moving into Sagittarius, right? So I think overall, the demise of what's going on, obviously, and like people waking up to it, even if it is complicated and difficult, I think the end result, will ultimately be positive, even if it takes a while to get there.
Well, it feels to me like we're going to be probably in the midst of the next American Revolution.
Yes.
And because those nodes, the North Node is going to go over all the Cancerian planets in the United States chart. And the South Node will ultimately, and very quickly, by the way, because I believe that the U.S. Pluto is at 25, 26 Capricorn. Is that right?
It's somewhere around there.
Yeah. So pretty clearly, right after the midterms, we're going to have the South Node on U.S. natal Pluto.
Wow, and the Pluto return of the United States in the next couple of years too.
Yeah. So whatever happens right after the midterms, so we're talking like November, December. Is a precursor of the Pluto return. So just to file that away.
Yeah, we'll definitely pick up on that where we're leaving off here next time, because that's definitely for the next lunar cycle, and that's a huge topic, and there's going to be a lot of action going on the next lunar cycle. So enjoy, everybody, the calm before the storm. Enjoy the nice energy of this really beautiful new moon, because I think that it's a very positive new moon, and a lot of people can make some very positive, proactive changes in their life throughout this month, with the equinox and all of that too. And, as we get into October and especially November, things are going to get a little bit dicier again. So we're in this sweet spot right now where we're manifesting from the eclipses, but we're not in the eclipses, and we're about to come into some more change, but we're we're readjusting, we're reorientating, we're getting grounded in Virgo. And
So how do you think we did, like, on the balance of political astrology versus personal astrology in this broadcast?
I think some people might have some stuff to say about the Israel chart. I don't know. Who knows? I'm not concerned. I honestly don't care what people think about what we're saying. It's I want them to enjoy the videos and not to get so wrapped up in the political opinions, just because we're keeping it pretty balanced. I mean, we're not really giving our judgments on it. We're just saying what's happening.
Absolutely.
And looking at it through the lens of the astrology. But people are very triggered. If you hear anything about politics, certain words immediately trigger reactions to people. Saying the word Trump is going to trigger a reaction.
I was going to say, we didn't say Trump one time until you just said it just now.
Oh, geez.
Now you've done it.
I know. But yeah, so, if you don't want to hear about politics, maybe don't watch these videos. But we don't really get into it that much,
I think we had a pretty good balance today, to be honest with you.
I think we did too. And I
Yeah.
think we're going to have a very good balance when we do our webinar, which I want to plug again because I'm excited for it. And I think
Absolutely.
and if you want to learn from Robert, who is my teacher, so if you like the way that I do astrology and you're watching me on my channel, I learned a lot of what I do from Robert and from, working one-on-one with him, but also through his course, the 11th House Academy, which I always want to mention and I forget to mention because I send so many of my clients to you for that 11th House Academy because a lot of my clients are students of astrology themselves. And, that's where I got started. And you did such a good job with that program. It's like, seriously, if you can't learn one-on-one or be with you in person, this is the next best thing. If not, even better because of the convenience factor. You can do it whenever you want. You can lay in and watch the videos.
Yep.
So you can find that at robertphoenix.com. And thank you so much for doing this with me.
Yeah, absolutely. So chime in with us while we do our webinar on Jupiter and Sag. It'll be totally great.
Yeah.
And we'll both have details where you can sign up on either of our sites and, jump on in. So thanks, Heather. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll join forces again when the next new moon rolls around and we can sort of peel back the layers and see what's happening, stars above us and within us. So thanks again, Heather.
Yeah, thank you.